So by way of a reading, I thought I would show a clip from Ted Lasso. I'm actually curious, how many of you have seen the show Ted Lasso? How many of you are here because you've seen the show Ted Lasso? All right, thank you. Thank you very much. So if you haven't, I promise not to give spoilers, I hope, although it's been out, so it's your fault. If you haven't seen it, just kidding. With streaming services the way they are, it is nobody's fault if you haven't seen a show. But I'm going to offer some context for what we'll be exploring today in our service, and I'm going to do it with as few spoilers as possible. So in season 1, we are introduced to Ted Lasso. It's coming back on, right? A perpetually optimistic American football coach who's made internet famous. Can you just unplug, maybe, or turn off and see what's happening? All right. Thank you. All right. So Ted Lasso, we are introduced to. He's a perpetually optimistic American college football coach, and he's made internet famous when this video of him celebrating in a locker room with his clearly bonded and supportive team goes viral. So then we cut to Rebecca Welton, whose recent painful divorce results in her becoming the new owner of the Richmond United UK football, aka soccer, team. And Rebecca recruits Ted to be the head coach of her team, despite Ted's ignorance about all things soccer, aka football, everywhere else in the world. And the reasons for this hire become clear over the course of the season. But to avoid spoilers, I'll simply say the hire is not exactly an act of benevolent faith in Ted's ability to turn the team around by bringing in his brand of positivity. Still, one of the first things that Ted does is to hang a big yellow sign with hand-painted big blue block letters that spells out "Believe" in the locker room. Even through the way he puts it up, the audience is made to understand that the most important thing to Ted is sending a message through that sign. He uses black electrical tape and a jump to overcome his height challenge, which results in him slapping it on the wall in this sort of jaunty angle. And then he stands back to survey his work and kind of is fine with it. And we glean, at least where signs are concerned, that perfection is not the goal. Still, this earnest gesture from a coach who clearly is over his head earns the immediate distrust of the players in the room. If we were to characterize their belief systems in the face of the "Believe" sign, we might call it 21st century secular cynicism. Ted has an uphill battle against him. And then over the course of the series, that "Believe" sign changes and shifts. In the first season, it operates as this static talisman, a source of inspiration in anxious moments, evidence of reluctant or a secret acquiescence of the coach's efforts is when a deeply cynical player whose speech means that I can't show you clips reaches up to touch it only when he knows he's alone in the locker room. It represents something essential about Ted's worldview. It's found in the locker room. But also we learn in the final episode of the first season that Ted believes so strongly in belief that he has the same sign stuck on his bathroom mirror in his house. As the series evolves, we also see the word and the sign and the mantra and the worldview that it espouses evolving. It is forced to become less static and more complex. We become conscious that there is a deeper exploration of belief underway. We are forced to ask questions about what exactly these people are believing in. We question whether the kind of belief that has offered each of the characters entry into community in season 1 was ultimately enough to sustain them through the challenges they would face in the coming years. And in season 3, Ted gives this speech to a demoralized locker room. I can't do a Ted Lasso voice. Belief doesn't just happen because you hang something up on the wall. It comes from in here, and up here and down here. And the only problem is we all got so much junk floating through us, a lot of times we end up getting in our own way. Things like envy or fear, shame. And he says he doesn't have time to mess around with that anymore. He says, you know what I want to mess around with? The belief that I matter, regardless of what I do or don't achieve. Or the belief that we all deserve to be loved, whether we've been hurt, or maybe we've hurt someone else. Or what about the belief of hope? That's what I want to mess around with, believing that things can get better, that I can get better, that we will get better. Oh man, to believe in yourself, to believe in one another, that's fundamental to being alive. If you can truly do that, can't nobody rip that apart. Here ends our reading. We're going to sing again, and I want to give you a little bit of context here. So I've mentioned this to some of you before, but it bears repeating or amplifying. Sometimes people find our use of singing in a modern-day congregation a little odd. For some, it seems like a throwback to Protestant Christian church roots, out of which many of us interact in our community today in slightly different ways. Within the current cultural milieu, gathering around the piano or the guitar or a campfire to sing is becoming increasingly rare. We're more likely to sing in private, in our showers, or along with the radio as we drive. I personally recently cracked a heretofore mysterious to me karaoke code. I used to avoid karaoke a lot, and then I discovered that if you choose a song that everyone wants to sing along to, it doesn't matter if you're singing because they're not listening to you. That's how we sing today. So why do we sing in a worship service? Well, we sing because singing has historically been one way that people express their spiritual yearnings. And we sing because composers used hymns to express their spiritual and theological understandings. And we sing because shared music is a uniting force in our denomination. But mostly, we sing because when else in our lives do we, no matter how accidental, take a breath together in community? Hymns offer us an opportunity to unite the rhythms of our individual bodies into shared affirmations of life. Think about that the next time that you're under-inspired by some hymn that I've programmed. And as I say that, it occurs to me that even that word inspired tells us that what we're doing this for, to fill ourselves up with the urge or the ability to feel something, to animate ourselves. Etymologically from the Latin inspirare, which meant to breathe or blow into, and carried with it a sense of the divine moving through us, leaving us with a deep truth or idea. So we sing now that we might breathe in air together, that we might together be inspired. So let us turn to hymn number 1009, Meditation on Breathing, which begins with a drone part. And I'm going to ask us to just take that drone part in, and then we're going to stop, and I'm going to talk a little more. So then starts on. Yeah. Meditation on Breathing, 1009. Teal, sorry. It just, the drone sign is, I'll come back to it. We'll survive. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breath, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. All right. I invite you to think of that drone line, breathe in, breathe out, as the sung version of that believe sign. And we're going to need some of you to stay on that line, keeping it going as a constant, because we need it there in the background to anchor us as we move into the layers of complexity of breathing together. So if you stay on that line, I urge you to close your eyes And notice whether or how those 4 words shift for you over the course of our singing as you deepen into the repetition. You might first connect to the words, but then by carrying them so long, they could start to lose their meaning and become meaningless syllables rather than the words that are imbued with meaning. And sticking with them, you might be surprised to locate new, fresh meanings. So those of you who stay on that drone line, we need you. You are important. I invite you to be open to the possibility of spiritual deepening within 4 words. So we'll start again on that drone, and then I'll take us into the rest of it. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. All right, we gotta stop here, people. Here's the thing about that drone line. Who's gonna be on it? I need a few more of you. Take it on. It's a meditative practice. All right. Who wants to make sure that that drone line keeps going? Anyone? Thank you. All right. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. Back to the run, everybody. In, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. We are so grateful for your generosity. So, I had halfway intended today's sermon to be an extension of last week, but then I realized in my conversations with people last week, by the fact that I was having a different conversation with each person, that I probably didn't say what I meant to. People got out of it what they wanted to, which I'm grateful for. And I really am a fan of regenerative agriculture practices. I want you to know that. But my hope had been to introduce this idea that we have these things that work in agriculture. What would happen if we found the things that work in community? Regenerative practices of community. So what does it mean to live in community in meaningful, mutually life-affirming ways? Ways that honor one another's spiritual journey, that build up rather than tear down, in the way that soil is built up rather than destroyed. They say that ministers have one sermon, and maybe this one is mine, but I think more than anything that ministers have a sermon that they think a church needs to hear, and so maybe that's what this is. Why do we think that criticism of something is evidence of engagement? It's in a grasping of individualism. And the question that I have is, what if instead we looked to engaging networks of mutual support, of saying, I loved that you stepped forward and offered, and I gratefully received. To feel this community as such a network, what would it take for us to make sure that we have that network here? We don't grow when we're told all that we're doing wrong. We grow when we know that we are supported and loved and held through doing our best. And Ted Lasso understands that intuitively. After almost any conversation that he has with somebody, no matter how offbeat the response was or how much what he received was not what he was expecting, he ends with, I appreciate you. What a kind gift to give to the world around. I appreciate you. Less judgment, more curiosity, regenerative community. When I talked about regenerative agriculture and the evidence of regenerative agriculture practices that have the power in a short time span to make significant changes in soil and crop health, to pull dangerous carbon loads out of the atmosphere and sequester it into the ground where it works to our benefit, not our detriment, I spoke of the reconstruction of vital, underground, interdependent, and seemingly invisible mycorrhizal networks that worked as a system to engender sustainable life. And then I asked, and I sensed this was my point that was underemphasized, I asked, what might we identify as the principles of regenerative community that could achieve similar results if we just adopted them en masse and devoted our energies to living out the values they represent? And I offered some examples: paying attention to the people around you, staying present, showing up, understanding the context in which we find ourselves, or the context in which the person that you are speaking to finds themselves, leaning into interdependence, rooting deep in a place, whether that place be the community at large here on the Vineyard or Atlanta or New Jersey or wherever you find yourself at home, but also growing stronger roots through adversity. When things get hard, go deep. Believing in the possibility of collective human flourishing, because it will not happen if we don't believe in it or value it. And noticing who is not present, who is being undervalued, who is being kept from full inclusion and agency. And this comes back around to that notion of being curious and not judgmental. This is a quotation that Ted Lasso uses in the show. He falsely attributes it to Walt Whitman, and it has been falsely attributed thus through the ages. Seems to have originated in the 1970s. Walt Whitman wasn't alive. But what he says, Ted Lasso says, is, guys have underestimated me my entire life, and for years I never understood why, and it used to really bother me. And then one day I was driving my little boy to school, and I saw this quote painted on the wall there. It said, be curious, not judgmental. I like that, he says. That's enough, right? To say, that is an inspiring quote. I like that. I vow to live my life within that principle. It is maybe a truth underknown amongst you all that I'm a huge fan of Herman Melville's Moby Dick. And I always love it in part because the Pequod, the boat in Moby Dick, is this microcosm of the world. All these people from all over the world make up that boat. And what happens on that boat is what happens in the world. But that's what Ted's locker room is as well. When he comes in, he inherits a team made up of players from all over the world, and they speak a wide variety of languages, and they represent countries from Nigeria to Mexico to Switzerland to Canada and beyond. They range in age and experience, and some of them are starting their careers, and some are near retirement. They range in ability and self-confidence on the pitch, from ego-driven superstars to journeyman worker bees who are used to being overshadowed by their teammates. These differences have produced a team that is divided when Ted walks in. Each person in the building is isolated in some way. Each one is carrying secret challenges and burdens, and each one is hiding the complicated pasts that might shed light on their current behaviors. Each one is an invitation to be curious instead of judgmental. Ted also inherits a staff that includes a bumbling and apologetic kit boy, Nate, who has been regularly bullied by the queen bees of the team, a boss who has an ulterior motive at odds with her stated one, a good-hearted but underappreciated director of communications who quietly lives his values, but understands those values to be at odds with the prevailing team culture. And as Ted comes in, his feckless enthusiasm rubs up against that secular cynicism in predictable ways. Everyone from the team to the reporters to the fans to the coaches and the owners of the other teams in the league all seem to be asking, who is this git and why does he think he belongs here? And yet, from the very outset, we are shown the subtle and powerful methods that Ted uses to generate culture shift. He never pretends to know more than he does. He finds the people around him who might be able to educate him in ways of being, and he asks them questions. He's curious and not judgmental. He works to cultivate one-on-one with as many people as he can, and his approach to team building is deeply relational. One might even say that it is guided by our first principle. He affirms and promotes the inherent worth and dignity of all within his sphere, whether they are an antagonistic journalist, or the Uber driver who picked him up at the airport, or the talented teenage girl who plays ball in the park in his neighborhood, or Nate, that kit boy who had previously been so ignored by the system that when Ted asks for his name, which Ted then remembers and uses, it's a shocking novelty. It's like, my name? You want to know who I am? And Ted remembers it and even adds the moniker, Nate the Great. He doesn't stop there. He rejects the inherited hierarchy that suggests that some people within the system need not be seen or valued, and he pointedly builds a mentoring relationship with Nate the Great, empowering his ideas and his voice. He knows what he doesn't know, and he asks questions and gets curious. He uses that common refrain, I appreciate you, in response to interactions with those around him, whether the ideas shared in conversation are even germane. He brings a small box of cookies, biscuits, to Rebecca every morning, which turn out to provoke a strong, nostalgic childhood memory for her, so powerful that she sends secret people out to try to figure out where the heck Ted is buying them. Curiosity. And despite her stated lack of time and general disinterest, she keeps her love of those biscuits hidden as she stuffs them into her mouth. Ted shows up over and over again for biscuits with the boss, returning morning after morning with his invitation into stronger relationship, represented by a few biscuits tucked into a little pink cardboard box. It is not dissimilar to the experience of coming through the doors of a Unitarian Universalist congregation. You might start out with some cynicism, cultivated through years of being disappointed by the hypocrisy or strict dogma or even personal spiritual trauma that you've seen or experienced in organized religion. I think in evidence today is a little bit of disorganized religion. We're getting there. You might be drawn to the idea that nobody here is going to tell you how to behave, what to believe, that our work together as a congregation offers reminders that your personal spiritual path is just that, it is yours. That we hope you will stay on that path and grow into who you can be, and that you will take solace or comfort or inspiration or even at times agitation as the natural consequence of choosing to come into community. You are invited to believe that there is worth to be found here in how we gather and why we gather, in the decision to pursue religious questions in community, which is, as we see all around us, an increasingly countercultural stance. But that believe sign changes over the course of the series. Is that entry point enough? That initial kernel of belief that there is a community out there capable of holding you in your journey, is it enough to know that it exists? I say no. Belief that is used to strong-arm people into certain practice versus belief that is used as a transformational tool to become more fully human and connected. That's the shift that happens in Ted Lasso. In the first season, you have belief, we must believe, we must believe. And Ted builds this community that allows him to fall apart so that everybody else can lift up and carry him when he needs it. In other words, they went from thinking that it was a static talisman on the wall to understanding that belief is a practice and that you come back to it over and over again. Community is a practice that you come back to over and over again. Belief is a practice. It is not a magic mantra, and our principles work in the same way. Through 3 seasons of Believe, the audience comes to recognize that even for Ted Lasso himself, belief for belief's sake does not have the power to sustain meaningful growth. It is not going to put carbon back into the soil. It is not enough to believe if it doesn't also cause you to act, to engage, to open yourself up to the fears and vulnerabilities of disappointment and loss and authentic expressions in community. In season 1, the community of Richmond United may only be capable of one kind of belief because they have been so stunted, their soil so depleted. Their understandings of themselves and their connection to their team and the community that supports them are depleted. They need the talisman, the hope offered by the sign on the wall. They need a toehold that will allow them to climb into something deeper. But if they don't let themselves go deeper, they've stopped the journey at the jumping off point. What they produce will not be sustainable or life-giving. It will not lead to human flourishing or to the kind of life and community that emerges when that symbol is threatened or questioned or denied or cast aside or rebuilt. No spoilers. Ted teaches a way of believing and connecting, and he builds a community capable of holding him when he loses his way, as others come into themselves and their own faith and belief in themselves, in the community they've constructed that gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and frankly, more and more spiritual. The mycorrhizal network is regenerating over the course of the 3 seasons of this show, and starting to do its work independent of Ted as the farmer who began to work the soil. What was Ted's belief morphs as a consequence of his work with the team, and through his efforts at community building and soil building and regeneration, over time he is able to create an environment in which even he can fall apart, which he does, spectacularly. But it can only hold him because he had sown the seeds of regenerative community from the very first slanty believe sign. So take that on offer, whatever your toehold may be, into community, and recognize that it is the beginning point and not the end. It's not a talisman that we touch. It's not a static belief. It does not sit there. It is a tool for engagement, and we believe over and over and over again until it becomes so second nature that what we've done is create belief in something so much bigger than we could ever have envisioned for ourselves. May it be so. Amen.